Jade has safely arrived, and you probably have as well. Can we get a different joke going here? If you pulled Jade, this guide will teach you how to play and build her. And if you lost 50-50, it's completely okay, because Himiko just got a massive buff this patch. At least, she did if you have Jade. My name is Braxophone, but you can call me Brax, and let's talk about Jade. Every single time a new character releases, they either bring something completely new to the table, or they're Argenti. Jade is Argenti, with a bonus 1, supporting ability that turbo boosts her damage, and 2, horrendous back problems. She's a unit that deals a ton of damage in 5-target combat, feeds off your teammates' attacks, and makes the Pure Fiction game mode a complete and utter joke. But her kit is incredibly convoluted and takes more time to read than the entirety of Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, so I'll try to make it pretty easy for you to understand. First off, Jade has a stack mechanic called Charge, and when you reach full charge, you release a follow-up attack that does ridiculous AoE damage. You get charges from both her own attacks and the Debt Collector's attacks, 1 stack for each enemy hit. Who's the Debt Collector? The IRS would like to know your location. Her skill speeds up a teammate because, like me, they're scared of women. Regardless of the level of her skill, it gives 30 speed, which is a lot. She also does the Tingyun coordinated attack thing, except it's quantum damage, and it hits all enemies that are attacked as opposed to just the main one. And this buff is actually based on Jade's turns, not the Debt Collector's, so the speed boost won't actually affect how fast the buff is lost. It'll last 3 of Jade's turns and expires at the start of her turn, so you can reactivate it with essentially 100% uptime. For every attack that your buffed ally does, otherwise known as the Debt Collector, they'll lose 2% HP, because even the government has to pay taxes, unless you're a millionaire. It's usually going to be best for AoE follow-up attackers to be the ones to be skilled by Jade, whoever has the ability to dish out tons of attacks and damage and can take advantage of the speed boost. These can be characters like Herta and Himiko, but even characters like Kafka can benefit from this, and I'll talk about all those in the team section. That way, Jade gets a ton of extra stacks of charge and can dish out a ton of damage. Like Argenti, most of Jade's damage is AoE, and like Argenti, she's a strong, beautiful woman. But on top of that, like Argenti, she also gives herself crit buffs, with another goddamn stack system. Jade's talent also gives stacks of what's called Pawned Asset. Now, Pawned Asset is basically just a crit damage buff that she can get that's equal to 2.4% at talent level 10, and it stacks up to 50 times. Jade gets up to 120 crit damage for free when she has max stacks, and it's super easy to get them, because every time Jade launches a follow-up attack, she gains 5 Pawned Asset, and with Traces, every time your skill-buffed ally takes a turn, Jade gets 3 Pawned Asset, and when an enemy enters combat, she gets a stack of Pawned Asset, and when you use her technique, she gets 15 Pawned Asset, plus 1 Pawned Asset for every enemy that enters combat at the start of battle. Basically, you're not gonna look at this number at all. Don't think about it, and you'll just max it in Pure Fiction by playing the game. And in other game modes, well, you're cooked. On top of that, her other major trace makes it so that Pawned Asset also gives attack bonus, up to 25% total attack at 50 stacks. Lastly, she gains 50% action forward at the start of combat, meaning that she can instantly get her buff off. Hoyoverse really knows how to sell characters, because the only thing that could have possibly followed up Firefly and still gotten sales is a tall woman with selfish intentions stepping on your face. Her ultimate costs 140 energy and deals AoE damage. It also buffs Jade's next 2 follow-up attacks by increasing the damage multiplier, so it's worth using when you have it, every 15 business days. As for her basic attack, it's a blast, meaning that every turn she'll be getting at least 3 charges if there's 3 enemies. For single target content though, that's where she falls off. Her AoE damage is only good because the actual damage per target is just decent, but hits all 5 enemies. Her single target damage is honestly more minor than the DMs of Dr. Disrespect. Jade was made for Pure Fiction specifically, and while she can be used outside of it, her best use case is carrying you to max score in Pure Fiction and collecting dust for Memory of Chaos. As for talent priority, you want to level up her talent, her ultimate, her basic attack, and then her skill. Jade's hat looks like it could be its own relic set, which is crazy because we actually got a brand new relic set this patch. But unfortunately, it doesn't look anything like her aesthetic and isn't even best in slot for her. Oh well, at least it works for physical characters that don't wear shoes. Jade's best in slot set is technically the Quantum set against Quantum weak enemies. Defense Ignore is so ridiculously strong, and Jade benefits a fair bit from the 2-piece. So you can take your retired Zila build and throw it on Jade. Unrelated, Zila found dead in a ditch. I'm gonna move on before Molly points a gun at my head. But against enemies that aren't weak to Quantum, the 4-piece Ash Blazing set is best for the follow follow-up damage 2-piece and the huge attack bonus 4-piece. Between the two, you can actually just give her whatever has the better substats since they're both so close anyways. If you don't have those in full 4-piece sets, you can also mix 2-piece sets of those or attack bonus sets. And if you're in the 1% of people that doesn't have quantum set pieces, follow-up pieces, and farm for Firefly, you can use the Valorant set. For planar sets, there's a ton of them that can work. For example, in Pure Fiction, Sigonia can be best due to the absurd crit value it can give. But you can also give Jade There Are Two Wolves Inside You, Still Broken, or Yanqing's Good Guys, I swear. I personally recommend Duran in general, or Izumo with a secondary edition, since they both get a lot of value in all of the content. But if you're only planning on using Jade in Pure Fiction, which is fine, Sigonia is pretty damn good. For stats, since Jade has no issue getting crit damage, you'll almost always want a crit rate body. Then you'll want attack or speed boots, quantum damage orb, and an attack percent rope. For boots, you can go speed if you want, but since most of Jade's damage isn't even during her own turn, and because that speed buff for your ally is based on her turns, attack is a little bit better, but again, you can just pick whatever has better substats. Speaking of which, for substats, anything that adds damage will be good. Crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent are all really solid, and effect res is always nice to have. Just in case you have ADHD like me and your eyes absolutely glazed over, here's a build summary for Jade. There are quite a few timeless classics in anime and gaming. One that comes to mind is Naruto. Despite it having a ton of episodes, still less than One Piece by the way, it's rewatchable and enjoyable multiple times and has stood the test of time, bringing in younger generations still to this day. Characters like Orochimaru had such great development over time, and I was absolutely stoked to see his new vessel in Honkai Star Rail. Speaking of timeless classics though, there's a lot of great light cones for Jade, including some free-to-play friendly ones. Now obviously her signature, yet hope is priceless, is going to be best in slot for her since it gives crit rate, follow-up damage, and defense ignore. Before Dawn is solid for the stat bonus, and Today is Another Peaceful Day at S5 is also really strong just because Jade's ultimate cost is 140, which is higher than most. Surprisingly, your 75-25 Lost Light Cone is also pretty good. The more copies the better, so keep on losing I guess. The Birth of the Self is great at S5, and if you don't have that or any of the 5-star options, the craftable Day the Cosmos Fell Light Cone at S5 is her best completely free-to-play option for quantum weak enemies, and is just a solid pick all around for the attack and crit damage. The other free-to-play option you might be interested in is the new Herta Shop Light Cone Eternal Calculus, which has some attack buffs and some speed buffs, though the speed itself isn't super necessary all the time. There's 10 billion Erudition Light Cones, so here's a chart that compares their damage in Pure Fiction and in other game modes. Now keep in mind that in content outside of Pure Fiction, the Light Cone ranking can change a fair bit, which is why there's two charts in this video, but most of the time you're probably just going to be using her in Pure Fiction anyways. I'm not gonna lie, I'm about to yap. There's 1,000 synergies for Jade. Literally, she works with so many different characters in the game because follow-up teams were already getting tons and tons of additions. And with Jade being a character that's focused on Pure Fiction, she just adds to the pool of characters that work together that was already an insanely large pool. And speaking of insanely large, look at the pudge on this thing and tell me that doesn't look like she probably doesn't feel the bottom half of her legs. So as mentioned before, Jade is a Pure Fiction character. That means that other characters that you would play in Pure Fiction are often going to be the ones that you play with Jade. Now, for example, that's characters like Himiko, who benefits a lot from having multiple enemies to break and does a ton of AoE damage on her own. That also includes characters like Herta. Both Herta and Himiko can get a lot of benefit from Jade because a speed boost will allow them to attack more. In Himiko's case, it's more breaks, which is more follow-up attacks, and when Himiko's attacking, Jade's getting more stacks. The same deal applies to Herta. She's definitely one of the best Pure Fiction units in the entire game because she just keeps swinging her hammer, and, you know, more attacks means more opportunities to bring their health down. More follow-up attacks just means more benefit to Jade. And Xingyan. And in this team setup, I decided to showcase Ruan Mei, but you can also play other characters as well. For example, if you wanted to play Robin, that would also be fine. I literally can't say, there are so many white and gray-haired characters. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, I guess she doesn't really have like gray hair. It's like in the same vein. It's not like obviously blue, like, okay, actually they have a lot of muted hair colors. Anyways, what I was saying is that Robin and Ruan Mei are pretty much interchangeable here, but you can also just play another DPS instead. So if you wanted to play Himiko and Herta, you could just play them together with Jade. You would give Jade's buff to whoever whoever's going to do more damage, which is probably going to be Himiko, because I'm not going to lie, Himiko's damage has slept on a ton, especially now that Pure Fiction is out and there's so many different supports that can work for Himiko. But depending on your investment, you may end up going with Herta instead. I would just pick the one that is honestly your better DPS. And then we have Aventurine as well, who's going to trigger more follow-up attacks. Now, if you're feeling a little spicy, you can always replace Aventurine with another supporting character like Ruan Mei, and then just reset 100 times until you don't get one character being attacked by every single enemy every single time. But if you're me, that it will never work and you should give up. But yeah, generally speaking, you can even just run 2 DPS with Jade, or you can just run another DPS and another support, and that's totally fine. Now, another team that I want to showcase, this isn't going to be the best team, but it's one that you can play if you just really like mothers, all 4 of them. Kafka has a follow-up attack. You proc it by using a basic attack, and because Jade can only use her skill once until her buff expires, and then she has to use her basic attacks, you're basically guaranteeing that you're going to get a lot of follow-up attacks. And also Kafka herself gets a follow-up attack, can proc 1 follow-up attack between every one of her turns, and if you speed her up with Jade, then Kafka gets a lot more turns, which means more follow-up attacks, which means more damage. And it's just an option that you have, especially for Apocalyptic Shadow. If you're against enemies that can be broken by grass type, holy fuck, did I just say grass type? Wind damage dealers, lightning damage dealers, quantum damage dealers, etc., then you can really take advantage of the fact that you will have so much more break when you have more follow-up attacks happening, more Kafka attacks in general. And this has actually worked out fairly well, even with E0 Jade for me. This was actually fine in Apocalyptic Shadow. Not gonna say this is the best all the time, but it works. If you're wondering why I used Aventurine for both of these, it's because Aventurine is just such a good character for Jade. That crit damage bonus and also just the value of Aventurine. One of the main reasons the IPC has synergy is because Jade taught Aventurine all about bust. So one funny thing about Jade is that because she takes HP, you can actually play her with Blade. Every attack of Blade is going to take 2% HP from him. Once Blade becomes the debt collector, and more attacks from Blade means more follow-up attacks from Blade, means more HP loss for Blade. You also can play Fushwan in this team just to make sure that Blade is still able to lose health, because let's be honest, if you're playing with Aventurine, you're just never going to drop HP. And then Ruan Mei, because Blade is not going to benefit from the attack from Robin if you play Robin instead. But these are 3 of the main supports you can run with Jade teams. And obviously characters like Pela are also going to work instead of team-wide buffers. You can always just have an AoE debuffer. But the only downside of Pela is that you might not always have her ultimate up to lower enemy defenses. And honestly, in Pure Fiction, you don't even really need that much. And it's usually going to be better to just buff your teammates. The only thing that I would be weary of is that even though Topaz and Jade can play together, Topaz is a single target damage dealer, and Jade gets more stacks based on how many enemies are actually hit. So because of that, it's not necessarily anti-synergy, but it's just not as good as it could be. Granted, Topaz gets a lot of follow-up attacks, but you don't always want to play these characters together all the time. Jade wants all of your money, and if you're this far into the video, you've already lost. Her design is genuinely so good, and with Topaz and Aventurine, the IPC has got it going on like Stacy's mom. Look, all I'm saying is that if the IRS looked this good in real life, maybe billionaires would actually pay their taxes. All of Jade's Eidolons have a threatening aura with the way they're worded. Jade's E1 is a follow-up attack buff that also gives more charge when less enemies are hit, which means she's more usable in content outside of Pure Fiction. With this Eidolon, you can get significantly more follow-up attacks in other content, which makes her a huge amount better for general use. It's an amazing Eidolon. E2 is going to be a crit rate buff for having 15 stacks of pawned asset, which helps with having bad substats or getting more crit damage from them. E3 is just going to be a skill and talent level up, which is fine, and E4 gives Jade defense ignore after using her ultimate for 3 turns, which is a pretty decent damage increase, depending on how many follow-up attacks she actually uses. E5 is going to be an ultimate and basic attack level up, and E6 gives Jade the debt collector state to gain more charge and speed, and it also lets Jade penetrate enemies. Between going for Eidolons or a light cone, I usually opt for light cones, but in Jade's case, she has so many solid light cones available to her free-to-play players and paid players, and her E1 makes her significantly more versatile. If you're only using her in Pure Fiction, her light cone is better, but if you want to play Jade in other types of content, E1 is going to make a huge difference. Now that we finally have a break from the super insanely important story characters, we can finally focus on pulling characters for their personality. Unfortunately though, Jade's whip and shoes do not come with haptic feedback.